Okay. I can record on the cloud too. Just so we're ready.
A few more minutes, and we'll let them in because I think.
I think maybe like two or three past because if we go till five past, people are going to be like, I think something's wrong.
Yeah, we did that
Like,
once before and a lot
yeah,
of people
and
left.
people leave.
I hate that.
So I think probably two
Nah,
past. So
okay, two passes
basically,
is good.
give like a few more seconds.
Are you all hosts?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think I made all
Oh,
of you guys hosts.
okay,
And
great.
who's gonna set up the breakout rooms to have everybody go into them?
I can do
Oh,
it.
okay.
Great, Nana.
Yeah, and
Awesome.
and Becca, we decided just we're going to equally divide across four rooms. So Dana
Great.
can
Love
set
it.
that up, I guess. Once
You
we
guys figured out a lot yesterday. Good job.
All
Uh,
right, two pass. Should I start clicking admit?
do
Oh,
it.
admit all.
You can do
Do
it
you
in
want
it
to do
all.
it, Becca?
Yeah, you do it.
Okay.
Such a power move.
I did it.
Welcome, welcome. Come on in, everybody.
Hi everyone.
Hello.
How's
Hey
it
there.
going?
Hey, Sean.
Hi. It's going good.
Good morning.
Nice to see folks.
How are you all feeling today?
Hi, Luke, Reed, Maya.
I'm feeling great, just starting the day.
Nice. Thanks for joining from West Coast time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We'll give it just a few more minutes and then we're gonna get going.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Nicola.
Hi there.
Hey.
Can't admit them in fast enough.
What a crew.
Nice.
Look at Drew is
Happy
right.
holidays, everybody.
Yeah.
I
Gabe's
can
Oh,
be our admit manager here.
I am doing my best to click my fingers as fast as I can.
Faster, Nana, faster.
Faster, faster. More admission, more admission.
Hey, Katie. Hey, ACT. Hey, Tika.
I hope everyone is feeling good at the end of a long year. Thanks for coming and spending this little time with us at the end. I know it's busy.
47.
That's probably a good number to begin going with.
Yeah, I think
Um,
so.
and if you want to just be on the admit.
Yeah, yeah. You can share a screen, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Jag tycker på telefonen hade fått någon stund. De börjar först nu. Hade det.
Can everybody see this okay?
Yeah, looks great.
yeah.
Cool.
All right. Well, I think we're ready to get going at 5 after.
Mm-hmm. Start us out, Becca.
Well, really great to see so many faces. Welcome to everybody. If you've been here before, if this is your first time, everyone is welcome. We uh, are really happy to be ending this year of RBLs on such a awesome accomplishment of this book. So I'm glad you all get to sit with this and as I do and hear from the foundation today. For those of you who are new to the space, the Regen Builder Lab is a collaborative forum for regenerative projects. And Austin and I spun this up about, gosh, I think it was a year and a half ago now. And it was originally called the Eco Credit Builder Lab, but the intention is the same, is it to build an open space for those that are creating regenerative projects wherever they are in the world and are rubbing up against all of the hard edges of what it takes to do that. So maybe it's, maybe you're developing credits, or maybe you're just running a community process to develop a project, or just trying to create a governance system for your community. What we have found is that we just really needed to create a big tent space for people to come and connect kind of human to human, to unpack challenging and complex topics, and to find some support and coherence and a path forward. So over the year and a half, we have talked and had experts in around verification, or we've dug into credit stacking. We've had demos about like how to run early numbers on potential carbon projects. We've demoed a lot of the Regen app and all of the functionality that we have to support regenerative projects. And I think probably the most beautiful thing that's come from it all is just really deeply seeing the amount of effort and care and progress that everyone is making in all their different corners of the world. So in many ways, it's a forum of support, but also of just like of celebration of how much is already happening, that we're just trying to expedite. So that being said, I am Becca Harmon. I'm with Regen Network, and the rest of the first section is going to be the Regen Foundation sharing about their book, and then we're going to do a series of breakouts. So what we normally do with RBL is we take the first chunk of time to dig into something new together, and then the latter part is where we unpack it together, and creating spaces for those that are totally new to the Regen space, spaces to ask questions and generally connect. So with that being said, I will pass it to the foundation team, to Austin.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks for that cue up, Becca. And thanks to everybody for coming. I'm trying to keep track of the amount of people who are still flowing in. Super thankful that you all took the time to be with us here at the end of the year. I know it's a busy time. We have something like 100, almost 160 people RSVP to this, so we'll see if we can get a really, really, really big Zoom call going on, which is super exciting. Um, like we said, we're going to be introducing this idea called ecological institutions, and the format for today, like Becca mentioned, is going to be like maybe 40 minutes or so, 40 to 50 minutes of presenting the ideas by the Regen Foundation team. And then we'll do like breakouts that will be open Q&A where people can introduce themselves, share their ideas, ask questions. And then we'll have a kind of like closer. And we'll be inserting some like calls to action for ways that people can like find hooks and points to stick in and to engage and develop their own work in relation to this as they like, kind of throughout. So yeah, thanks for being here. We're going to be introducing ecological institutions, and the goal is to give a kind of walkthrough on some of the foundational thinking and praxis and practical implementation that are being articulated in Regen Foundation's latest release. So RBL began initially as in kind of eco-credit building space, and it's kind of interesting that we're doing like an eco-institution building space, and within that larger breadth like shows the sort of range of the work that our community is doing. So let's get going. I'm Austin Wade Smith. I also go by AWS. I'm the executive director of Regen Foundation, and I'll ask the other Regen Foundation folks to Regen Foundation and other Regen Network folks who are here just to give a really brief intro and say hi.
Yeah,
Hi.
hi. Go ahead, Will.
I'm Will Zoll. I'm the president of the board here at Regen Foundation, and I'm calling in from Western Massachusetts. Over to you, Shyla.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shaila Aga. I'm calling in from Nairobi, Kenya. I work in programs at the Regen Foundation.
Hi, I'm Nena. I'm calling in from Vienna and I'm the program manager at Regen Foundation.
And some R&D friends.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gregory. I'm the CEO at Regen Network Development, which is the software company supporting the broader Regen Network initiative.
Tika, do you mind?
Hey, Tika, and I've been working with Regen on method development and kind of project onboarding. Nice to see you all.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for the intro. Okay, so we're here to talk about, make sure this is all going. We're here to talk about this recent compendium that we're releasing and inoculating into the world starting now. And it's called Ecological Institutions, Law, Economics, and Technology in a More Than Human World. Um, it's currently available through like a donation to the foundation because we're in an advanced like early release phase. And we'll share links in the chat and also throughout so that you can directly know how to go about acquiring the book. But no, it's in this sort of like early phase and we're rolling it out incrementally. And and part of this early release is the idea that we're going to be sharing it with particular folks who might offer up like endorsements or ways of sort of positioning this work within their body of practice to sort of spread the surface area and introduce it. So we'll share one endorsement that we think is really well aligned with what we've been working on from the first cyber minister of Taiwan named Audrey Tang. If you know this person, if you know, you know. They're awesome. And Audrey writes, this essential volume offers a profound upgrade to our social operating system. By daring us to unduel the false separation between our digital and living worlds, giving rivers, forests, and entire biomes the agency to participate directly in our protocols of civic care. Masterfully bridging ancient wisdom with the cyber commons of tomorrow, this book's a vital read for anyone committed to weaving our many networks into an infinite garden. We thought that was a really elegant sort of way to intro the book, and maybe I'll use the back cover as another way of sort of helping give some positioning. And we're going to do a fair amount of positioning in this to help contextualize the sort of practical implementation. So this is what the front and back cover look like. We collaborated with this incredible design office Props to do it. So shout out to Props. And I think the back cover is one of the better distillations that we as a team have put together for it. And this is the only other time I'm going to read directly off of text. So it says that being human is not defined by our escape from nature, nor our dominion over it. It's the practice of multiplying the surfaces upon which life perceives and expresses itself. As the myth of separation collapses around us, how do we teach the systems we've built to nourish our world rather than consume it? And there's a lot going on in trying to like make some like strong claims around what it means to be human. And we don't shy away from that kind of positioning in this book, but I'll zoom in on the sort of second paragraph around the notion of the kind of mythologies and stories we tell ourselves, about who we are and how we come to be in relation or exempt from the living world. And we oftentimes use the word living world. We oftentimes use the word living world instead of nature for a number of reasons we can unpack in breakout rooms, but that's what I mean when I say the living world. So the first prompt relates to kind of the first section of the book, and it has to do with outgrowing certain kinds of creation mythologies people have about their relationship to the planet. And we use this sort of awkward term that we coined, but it seems to be helpful, so we'll keep using it, called undueling, to introduce that. And part of the crux of undueling is the idea that living systems and socio-technical systems, or might be called like social systems or technology, living systems and socio-technical systems are not inherently in opposition. And that's a kind of mythology that fundamentally needs an overhaul. And so the first part of the book is a collection of like active efforts to weave new kinds of mythologies.
I'm trying to work.
Maybe we can mute someone. That was cute. The kind of mythologies we tell ourselves around like our relationship to the planet, like going all the way down to the firmware in the operating system about what it means to be social and what it means to be a human being. And so across 7 different mythologies, we introduce like ways to rewrite these questions and lean into the kind of mythopoetic narrative hack potential that like upstream of all the sort of technical codes and things that we might talk about today is a narrative craft. And so the first 4 are by myself. The first mythology, we'll introduce them briefly, and each person who wrote them will speak to them a bit. The first one is about precisely this nature of undueling, which is to say you can't integrate that which has never been separate. there has been no actual separation between ourselves and the planet. So there's not really much utility in saying how do we reintegrate ourselves with the world. We've never actually been separated from it. So how do we like dismantle and rediscover this force that forces this dualism? And the second piece is on common sense, and it's around practices and protocols around how people see and perceive the world, sense the world, and sense our place within it. And from those perceptions, how that might inform economics and law and various technical systems. The third one is called Ecological Institutions. It's kind of one of the anchor essays for the whole piece. It's publicly available when we share the link at the end of the presentation. Um, you can look at it and read it today. And I'll just leave it at that because we'll talk about it for the rest of the time. And the fourth one is called Living Covenants. It's the newest one and it explores the idea of like, what is how do we upgrade the social contract? And the social contract is a kind of story around like us escaping a world that's like nasty, brutish, and short into some higher order. And we explore that particularly through the lens of like how we craft contracts and covenants with the more than human world. And I'll pass it to Will to do the two hyperbeams ones.
Hey everyone. So you might have seen in our subtitle, we have that designator more than human. So there are so many more than human others from lichen to trees and more. And one of the things in hyperbeings that I've been trying to look at is what about these massive more than human others, such as mountains or a species as a whole, or oceans or rivers. And so if we look at the kind of building blocks of what Austin's presented in these other mythologies as composable, you can take ecological institutions and living covenants and undueling, and that kind of builds up to this hyper beings concept. And I'll pass it over to Shyla to
Thanks,
introduce the next
Bill.
one.
Yeah, so my section is in the mythologies is East African mutualism, which is a living body of research and practice too that examines how modern day chamas, mutual aid, and kinship based cooperation has long functioned as resilient systems of governance, of regenerative care, reciprocation, and economic coordination. So I'm really excited to unpack that and talk more about it and pass it on. Mhm.
Right. So new mythologies kind of require new characters to tell them, and we're just going to give a little shout out that throughout the book, there's this whole cast of characters that are sort of like storytellers that are interesting, like interpretations of in a visual form some of the underlying themes, and they're available as a sticker pack too, and everyone loves sticker packs, of course. Um, so the second prompt that I'm going to give after we sort of establish this idea of like kind of mytho level exploration is if we've if we've crafted this recognition that the living world and the social technical world are not dual, like what do we call these things? They've been around for a long time, and yet there's also new ways to describe and like express them in modern form. So we're calling them institutions, and part of the fact of calling them that is it's a little bit awkward of a phrase. And I think you'll find throughout this the sort of desire to experiment with language to the point where it sort of breaks. And if it does, or it becomes limited, that there's something being revealed there. So we're calling them ecological institutions, but one of the interesting things about institutions is that they tend to like live past the expiration of any individual actor that's a part of them. So, you know, different roles come and go, CEOs and EDs and different like participants might participate, but the institution persists. And there's some of the longest running like social creations we've made, you know, like beginning to approach the lineage of like a redwood. And that's a human construction, a social construction. And one of the ways that institutions are these kind of interesting forms that we could think about ecologically is that they persist because they're defined by their modes of interaction and relation between the different actors in them. The kind of codes that structure how people interact and what their purpose or what their mission is, or how they allocate resources, or how they identify their North Star. So part of the crux of this is to explore the idea of how institutions are a kind of like life form in the meta crisis, Like in this Anthropocene, institutions could be understood as a kind of essential unit of living systems that occupy this undual space. And if we think about like the world beyond ourselves, we'll use mountains as a kind of helpful framing of this. We can think about there's many different sorts of like codes and interactions that define our interaction with these places. So in the biophysical world, what might be like biology or ecology, there's lots of codes and like relationships happening. I mean, they're innumerable, but DNA is a good example, like signaling in patterning and colors within ecosystems is a kind of system of codes. Um, and we often think, okay, that's ecology, but in any given time that the social world's interacting with the more than human world, there's lots of other codes happening that form kind of institutional processes. And like legal codes are a big one. A big part of this project took inspiration from what might be called like the rights of nature movement, more than human personhood, legal standing for the more than human world. And that's to say we're using legal codes like rights and standing. Those are particularly like structured logics within the legal system and saying how are those expressions of an interaction between humans in the world? And similarly, if you know anything about the Regen Network project more broadly, we've been really active in trying to develop high integrity models around economics with living systems, regenerative economics. And that follows its own codes of like accounting and double entry bookkeeping and what are the terms of all these different instruments in the sort of economic and financial world. And like the codes that structure technology, how do we perceive and render a mountain or a mountain range or a bioregion? How is it structured into data? How is it made into a remote sensing image? What's the compression? What's the loss there? Is there IP? Is there privacy questions? All the way up to like political codes around how people, rally to sort of like, whether it's eco-fascism or a kind of appeal to a sort of like national park sentiment. We occupy like political codes that allow us to like wield and engage with the more than human world. So we're thinking of institutions as like codes in action. And the codes occupy many different forms. And by introducing it this way, we're not giving like these are biological codes and these are contrived social codes. They're all a part of a kind of larger medium through which we might express a new pattern of kinship. And that's sort of at the root of what this project is about. So the third proposition is that in order to like maintain these institutions historically and in the present form, we use these different kinds of like rituals and protocols to weave these different kinds of codes together to form institutions. And part of the point of using the framing of rituals and protocols is because it's awkward. And I want to just highlight that a lot of people, like in their reflex, will be like, well, yeah, we're not separate from nature, but don't talk about like money related to nature, or like let's not talk about like privacy or intellectual property when it comes to the more than human world. Like if we take seriously the mandate that the two worlds aren't separate, it actually makes uncomfortable situations. And part of this prompt is to invite you all to occupy that awkwardness. And so rituals is largely native to like digital systems and sort of like larger bureaucratic or administrative systems, whereas, sorry, protocols are associated with those, whereas rituals might be much more animistic in the realm of the sacred. And by putting the sort of two together, asking about rituals and protocols, we're just like making a bit of an awkward challenge to be like, oh, these actually come together. We use protocols all of the time. Like I introduce myself if I don't know you. I might shake a hand or give a hug depending on the context. In order to fix a light bulb, I might go through unscrewing it or pulling out the outlet. There's protocols around how we like navigate systems. And so what we'll spend a lot of today talking about is like ways of unlearning and recultivating new kinds of rituals and protocols to make new kinds of institutional forms that center like right relation, stewardship, and kinship between humans and our planet, like in the intent of like rewriting that creation mythology. And I oftentimes feel frustrated that a lot of people feel very enthusiastic that, yeah, we are nature, but then feel very skeptical about, oh, actually thinking through all the social systems we made, those are too. And examining those like is actually a space of a lot of fruitful potential. And Shaila's been examining this in this like brilliant in-depth way in the context of East Africa for quite some time. And I'll ask her to like give some of that context in relation to what we've been talking about.
Thank you, Austin. So this is a picture of Mount Kenya, beautiful picture of Mount Kenya, I might add. And how do we go from mountain to institution? So I'm going to begin somewhere familiar, but often misunderstood. We all look at, in many places, I'm sure in most of the Western world, you look at mountains and you think, scenery or a resource or occasionally even a symbol. But in the traditions surrounding East Africa, where I'm from, Mount Kenya, or originally known as Kirinyaga, it has never been an object, but has actually always been a subject. So Kirinyaga, which is also axis mundi for a lot of the mountain peoples, this is the sacred bridge between earth and the divine, has always been a seed bank. It's been an archive holding genetic memory in its soil and in its forests. It's also a water tower whose glaciers feed and sustain rivers for millions of lives downstream. But more than that, it's literally a living reference point around which all the people of the mountain oriented their behavior, their ethics, their restraint. More importantly, this mountain was the entire culture of the entire place, which is really nice. So for centuries, communities have never asked, oh, what can we get from the mountain, or how can we extract from the mountain? But it's rather, how do we remain in the right relationship with her? And this question is actually quietly where institutions begin. So before we had any kind of written law, before colonialism, before the state of Kenya, before any kind of constitution or law, governance already existed through ritual and protocol. And I'm going to unpack what these words really mean. So the rituals at the time, centuries ago, was literally the operating system that we all operated by. And it determined basically when the land could be cleared, when you were not supposed to do anything with the land, when you could redirect the water from the river, say, to a little pit, when you could hunt animals, when the humans had to not hunt animals. All of these were basically not beliefs that were imposed on nature, but it was actually responses to nature. So this is like responses that were refined through generations of observation. So what we look at is like cloud patterns, river behavior, animal migration, soil fatigue, and all these were empirical knowledge that was carried not in spreadsheets or in websites or in books, but rather in stories, which I find super fascinating. So importantly, like these rituals did something so profound and so subtle, but lasted, all these generations later. So they turned the land from just this object of use into an actual participant in governance. And as Austin said before, every single day we're living in protocols, even if we don't name them. We queue automatically when we're a big group of people trying to get something. You carry a bottle of wine when you're going to dinner at a friend's. They're not like laws, but they're just shared agreements that we've all somehow agreed to. And we continue to do them because this is how you remain in relationship with one another. So in the same way, these communities around Kirinyaga, they lived inside these protocols with the natural world. And we understood how to approach a river, how to approach a forest, what to do when you are hunting an animal, which animal you can hunt, which one you can't, which one never to touch, when you were able to take things and when you were not able to take anything. So these rules were never imposed by anyone, by any government or imposed from above, but it's rather this practice that was learned through observation, through memory, and most importantly, through consequence. So these protocols shape behavior long before any kind of institution ever existed. And they really aligned the human action with ecological feedback in such a beautiful way. ensuring that this land, water, animals, all of us together could just symbiotically live. So when we today invoke protocols, we're basically remembering old language that doesn't really treat the world as a resource to manage, but rather as a relationship to be kept.
One of the things that I think is really cool about the Mount Kenya example that has helped center our work is like, if we think about these storytelling as a sort of proto-institution or norms that like Shyla's describing, like there's very real consequences to having the glacier be the headwaters that irrigates all of the fields for like a society. And so the myth or the storytelling around a sacred reverent object being a way of making sure that like the commonwealth of water is protected. And Charlotte didn't mention this as much, but that the mountain is actually a seed bank because it's isolated and cold. So it's a store of like genetic code, a genetic diversity. It's a resilience model, but by using the sort of the notion of a sacred ground, it ensures that like the genetic lineage of a culture remains intact, and that's not necessarily through an institutional form, but through storytelling and myth. Um, and so, if you're familiar with our work over the past couple of years, you've probably seen this diagram in various forms, which is to say the kind of dead logic that many of us, we basically all inherited, might treat such a mountain as a kind of object or a resource, like an inert thing. And we're in this transformative moment around recognizing that we're in a world like populated with beings, a world populated with subjects. The Rights of Nature is like takes this quite literally with personhood. If you're familiar with the new book, Is a River Alive by Robert McFarlane, that's like right in this category of thinking about the beinghood and the subjective nature of the more than human world. Will's got the hard copy there. And we're trying to go one click further to say, can these be like institutions? And how through norms, mythology, storytelling, are our relations with the more than human worlds like maintained? And I think Mount Kenya is just like an incredibly beautiful example of that. So those are like the kind of three prompts that contextualize and frame this larger question, and they really populate the first part of the book. But speaking to this idea of like rituals and protocols, one of the core practical motivations that we have is to meet this sort of rewriting of lore or the kind of the craft of narrative and the stories we tell about like our planetary operating system and get into the question of like what does this look like in the current moment in the sort of non-neutral container of like climate collapse that we're in. And one of our central questions for the last 4 years or so has been how have the different organizations, communities, indigenous tribes we've been directly working with, how do they form rituals and protocols that allow them to form a kind of internal coherence, that allow them to engage with external actors in the form of investment, contracts and agreements, tools, artificial intelligence, and allow them to interact with these systems in a way that strengthens their resilience rather than subverts it. And there is a lot of conversation about how funding is really important. And I'm not going to contest that funding is important. How do you allocate, fund what matters? I get it. It makes sense. But a humble proposition is to say that if support or investment is distributed or allocated to groups that don't have the coherence to be able to steward that with integrity, it oftentimes subverts their ability to act rather than strengthens it. So we think of this work as a kind of practical, necessary counterpoint to thinking about how resources flow. And it's about like, what is the readiness? What is the capacity, the internal coherence within an organization, a tribe, a community, an institution to be able to form interactions and agreements with the larger world. And that has sort of prompted the second part of the book that we call the IDK. And yeah, I'm going to admit it's a bit of a clunky frame. Again, we're like trying it to the point where it breaks. If you're familiar with some of the world of software development, there's such a thing as an SDK, a software development kit, which is sort of like a framework with which people can use components and parts to build out digital protocols. And we're taking an inspiration from SDKs and saying, well, what are the sort of components and parts that we might workshop and collectively develop that allow new kinds of rituals and protocols to be developed? And not just uniquely for digital systems and not just uniquely for living, biophysical ones, but these hybrid entities that we're talking about, this undualed ecological institution flavor of it. So there's a lot of important and interesting work from many colleagues and friends that have right now is kind of a renaissance in the world of like programmable digital governance for primarily online communities. Like many groups are, have a kind of politics of a group chat, or there's discussions of people exiting to the network state and network nations and all sorts of different flavors of like digitally native institutions and a new kind of like exploration of the coordination and governance that's native to them. Modular politics by a collection of people working in the world of digital governance takes this idea and says it's sort of like a drag and drop framework by which people in online communities can develop systems to coordinate amongst themselves, to determine if they have consent or consensus, to allocate resources, to enter into agreements. The Gnosis Guild's Project Zodiac is another like cool example of a kind of modular process of developing coordination systems, developing coherence. And one of the interesting things about working in this hybrid living in digital space that I'm going to call a commons, like a collective model of stewardship, is that we can think about the ways that people govern and coordinate digital commons like Wikipedia or like open source software like Linux as being kindred to ways people like manage community resources like water, glaciers, seed banks, things like that. And this is kind of like the thrust of what ecological institution governance is like angling at. And so the middle example on the left-hand side is a fun paper that explores a comparative analysis around how governance for the development of Linux maps onto governance processes by Nepali farmers in determining who gets access to water in their irrigation systems. So how is like irrigation governance in the Nepali plateau related to the way people are governing access to digital resources? There's resonance here, and I get it that that might not be obvious, or there's a lot of words being sort of in circulation, but it's still a part of this idea of like living in digital networks being native to one another. So the thrust of how we've developed this idea within the IDK, and we're going to kind of intro the IDK more explicitly now, is a kind of three-part model that has been the result of more or less 4 or 5 years of us directly in partnership with land steward communities that are also organizing in digital contexts. So you could say they're bioregional, but yeah, they're definitely online too, because right, there's no dualism. People are already doing these things all the time. So the first part of this sort of like loop that makes a kind of tight iterative process, the first part has to do with a sort of like boundary formation, like who's in and who's out. What is the membrane that forms a group, a sense of identity? You would call that constituting. The second part of the process of developing this is sense making, sensing internally around what people think, what is their conviction, or is that through voting or consensus or whatever it might look like, but also sensing the external world. So like perceiving internally and externally, perceiving the sensing process. And based off of that entity can essentially enter into agreements, do interventions, like just do things and form into like relationships with other entities. And if it sounds like I'm kind of describing like an elementary form of like life, like it's kind of the point. It's like a boundary formation of a cell, the ability for the cell to like navigate and sense its environment externally and also internally, and then form into multicellular things. And so there's some cybernetics here that we could talk about in another slide, but the point is that it forms a kind of loop, a kind of like an iterative loop around capacity building to form coherence. And part of what we're really after is the ability for support in like collective determination. And you could call that sovereignty according to one definition, but it's ability to like to govern oneself. Some friends from the MetaGov collective call it like govern or be governed. And this is maybe like exercising the muscle to be able to govern oneself. So the IDK follows these three parts, but then breaks it into subsections that are essentially like building blocks, like components that prompt discussion, interaction amongst different participants to think through how are they forming a constitutive self? How are they sense making internally and navigating and perceiving the context of the world they're in, and then creating bindings, formalized forms of interaction, whether that's through proposals, allocations, and covenants. And one of the things that I really want to emphasize is that the first two cards that we're gonna walk through that Nena's gonna like speak to are not speaking from a level of territory or like a high level of regional scale. I mean, it's certainly relevant, but part of our point is to like introduce the elemental forms, the protocols and rituals of entanglement. Like, how do we interact in an elemental way through living in digital systems? And peering, which is a way of saying like forming peers, like establishing trust. How does trust propagate? How does it form? How does it cascade between people? And that all of this is based off of like kind of a critical questioning and in like an inviting of like how are we interacting and entangling in one another? What are the rituals and protocols of entanglement? What are the rituals and protocols of building trust? And so we're not going to show the whole kit, but we will show later on like an opportunity for folks to reach out and do pilots with the IDK. And in 2026, we have a number of pilots set up and have been doing them, but they're sort of like color coded according to the logic. And we can think of it, maybe it's like a facilitation guide, maybe it's like a game, maybe not, maybe it's like a sort of a mode of workshop to support groups to form this sort of collective coherence. And some of our main projects are in East Africa and in Aotearoa, the Maori Nation, around developing these capacities. But it can happen all over the place. And we just like got the first run of them, so we're really excited and don't have a ton of pictures of technically like these cards, the notion of an IDK. And I want to say it's like it's not like it's the IDK, it's like an institutional development kit. Here's a stab at doing this. Maybe you all have different opinions or like an existing practice that's different, but we're trying to like strengthen the muscle to talk about it. And Nen has been doing that just recently last weekend in Catalonia.
Hi. My colleagues have described the ontological shifts that has been prompted through this book very eloquently, and I'm gonna take a stab at showing how these cards could be workshopped in context to a particular project in the field, in the house, in the community hub with your friends. So a big shout out to V5 Barcelona team that gave this work a little bit of love and attention and time to workshop this together. It was definitely a lot of fun. So just for a little bit of context, this was done as part of the new program that they're launching called Regenerate Catalonia. But this is a basic low barrier to entry allocation protocol to support local funding programs, to support like funding programs that supports local projects within an ecosystem. So this is not supposed to be anything super complex that requires high level of like Web3 or cryptographic knowledge, but just something simple that they have been trying out to get groups excited and build capacity to eventually do more complex things, like they can manage the fund together where they don't need an entity to do that, or they could present their impact in a digital way better so that the funders actually know what has been going on. So the intention of these allocation programs are actually to build capacity so that they can take on more and more responsibilities going forward. But this might be applicable for a lot of other projects that exist that are trying to do similar things. So the first thing when we started the workshop, we took out the first two cards, which are kind of like the Joker cards, like the Trump cards, that basically allow you to situate yourself within the wider network that you're embedded within. That could be bioregional, that could be digital networks that you're a part of, that could be a funding ecosystem that you're a part of, whatever that may be relevant to you. And I distributed them the cards, and then they kind of read through them, took some time to like absorb the information. So on the right hand side is the front part, and on the left hand side is the back part. So the back part kind of like gives you prompts to collectively reflect together on where do you really lie? Like, are you more on the analog side? Are you more on the extreme digital side? Where is your comfort zone and where are things actually happening? So the first thing is to identify that, which also tells you where is the technical capacity within your group. It is not to say that everything needs to be on the extreme digital end. It is just to get a sense of where does the comfort zone really lie. And then after we spoke through that, then we went through the invitations process, where I basically read the questions out loud and they basically reflected on what those answers might be. If you can go to the next slide, which is the peering. So when we were doing that, a lot of different elements sort of came up on what that links to basically how they form entanglement and peering within their broader context. As they were speaking of their answers, I basically took those cards out from the pile and I basically started to like stack them aside because I was trying to get a sense of like what other elements do they think are really important for them in their process. And after that process was done, I distributed them a new set of cards that basically came out of this discussion. And they read through them again. And we basically had a 3-minute meditation session because there was like quite some information that had to be absorbed and everybody needed to take a minute and a breath to basically think about what it really means. And then we really spoke of like what stood out really from these cards and what seems really alive and relevant. And if you can move to the next slide. And then sort of this diagram sort of got made, which basically shows that for this group, it was really relevant because they're not working with extremely technical people. For them, a lot of these things were happening through convenings, whether on Zoom call or in person, that brought together a sort of like dreaming canvas about how they want to regenerate the bioregion and support the socio-ecological transition within those regions. And that sort of reflected the conviction, like the way people showed up to these gatherings and how repeatedly did they show up and did they actually make commitments to what they are what they would do to support these dreams and how they would actually do after making those commitments, would they actually stand by it and actually do those commitments or not. The conviction part really stood out because it actually showed it actually was reflective of how the community was building capacity to show up to this type of work. And for each iterative loop of this, there was some allocation made, both in resource, in the sense of like monetary resource and non-monetary resource, to actually support that loop. And after each allocation cycle, there would be an iteration where we go back to how that affected the entanglement and peering bonds within their ecosystem. And the second cycle would start again, and then we would go back. So this is basically like a strength training exercise to start from the very basics of what it means to govern our collective futures together, and then try to do more complex things. A lot of things that my colleague Sheila shared about was actually talking about entanglement, not just in the sense of like being entangled in an ecosystem of organizations and cooperatives and associations, but it was about entanglement with like living world itself. That when we think of the social life around us, we don't just think of human beings and human-made things, but we actually think of also bird species and soil health and different kinds of trees that are around you and the fruits and the vegetation and all these different kinds of things. So the idea is to actually go back to being in that form of kinship with the living world. We have to exercise the muscle and sort of retrace our paths of how we can reach there. And eventually in this iterative loop, when you think again of what does entanglement mean, the answers would be completely different.
So I think it's an interesting prompt here that like I respect that we might be getting into what seems like a kind of meta territory, and it's hard to craft something that's like seems like it has tangible consequence that people can grasp a hold of while also making something that's broadly applicable. And I want to emphasize two of the points that Nana said that I think are really interesting. One, we're trying to create a place where these questions are oriented towards not just people, but people and environment, people and context, and also on a spectrum from like what you consider like a digital convening space, for example, versus a physical convening space. And so the questions and the sort of examples are a way of sort of inviting that reflection space. And maybe that's like the most we can ask for. We can think about how they link up together into interesting sort of larger flows according to what people want to do. Maybe that's getting into some kind of SDK type of territory, but at its root, it's creating a kind of space for structured reflection that like through our kind of narrative framing allows this sort of capacity and readiness to be exercised and developed. And it centers around this sort of iterative cycle and process that begins, but it's not just like it's a linear from start to finish. And Shaila has been doing this in the context of East Africa for quite some time, and that's one of the really main anchors in the East African mutualism work.
Yes, and this slide is an excerpt actually from the book, and it's my humble attempt to marry the past and the present. What we're doing with the IDK cards is not really digitizing tradition. It's more about allowing traditional cultural intelligence to guide modern tooling. So from the mountain example, we've learned already that ecology precedes institution, that stories preceded system, and that relationships precede rule. And digital governance or governance of tomorrow doesn't need to erase this lineage. It can finally learn from it, which is really important because ecological institutions begin where dependency is acknowledged, when survival is visibly tied to a living system. Governance emerges naturally, not as control, but rather as care, as reciprocation. I think I'm going to dive more deeply into each and every one of these examples during the breakout sessions, for instance. But I just wanted to speak a little bit about more how Kirinyaga really functioned as what some may call an institution without walls and paperwork and bureaucracy, but rather with dependency, with memory, accountability across generations. And this is the critical point that I want to offer to you all today, that, you know, these rituals and protocols of the past are not just beautiful cultural artifacts to be looked at or preserved in glass or in documented books, but they're actually adaptive systems that worked because they were designed to regulate behavior in extremely complex living environments. We have an abundance of institutions today. Not many are working, and they really do lack this relationship, which I think is the basis of everything. Modern governance has become really, really good at abstraction, you know, so land now is property, and water is infrastructure, and forests are assets. And in this process, we're taking all the living systems that sustain us and stripping them of their voice. So these protocols in East Africa in particular, in my research, what I noticed, these protocols have never disappeared. They actually survived in chamas, in informal councils that we still have today, in mutual aid, in seasonal rhythms of planting and harvesting, in places like Mida Creek, which is one of the examples of the places in our book, and in how these communities still organize, care, labor, and accountability when the regular systems and infrastructure falls short. So basically, the question that we're grappling with right now is not really how they invent ecological institutions, but rather the question is, how do we let these living protocols speak again and shape the institutions of the present? So the rituals can guide behavior when they're not superstition anymore. They're not mythology, but they become governance. And they can regulate extraction because it's not just myth alone, but it'll be law that's written in memory, land, and in consequence. And I think East African mutualism and the Kirinyaga example reminds me, and I hope all of you, that institutions don't have to begin with documents, but rather with relationship. And so if there's any future worth building, I think we're going to have to remember that.
So this contextualizes the third and last part of the book, which is where we go into roughly like 10 different partnerships and collaborations internationally with different groups. And there's a risk of like trying to break them into components that are sort of discrete, like what is a commitment versus a covenant versus an identity or a pattern of dreaming. I understand they're like leaky containers. Um, but we examine a range of different collaborations, some of which are on this call right now. Shout out to Terra Genesis and Luke Smith. I think the Earthist and Soto group are here. We're discussing this with Abdul and Ubuntu Resets, and also talking about this with Gmo, just to give a shout out to the people who are physically here right now. Um, and this is a part of an active process to say, okay, like in collaboration, what does this look like? We work on an invitation basis, so we've been writing and developing in collaboration with Regen Network Development software related to more of the economics and technology of like ecological institutions and systems of value. And we're in this phase where we're like actively crafting sort of patterns and processes of readiness and capacity, like understanding what are the ethics of this kind of collaboration. We're pretty acutely aware of them. A significant one we'll be working on in the early part of 2026 is supporting a sovereign region in the northland of Aotearoa, which is an indigenous way of saying New Zealand, to allow hapu, which are like local governance councils, to support them in exercising the muscle around their self-determination, so that they themselves are determining how they are standing in relation to the more than human world and how that relates to the crown, the Commonwealth, etc. And that project is specifically developing like a living covenant, which is outlined in one of the essays. The name for that project has been called like a digital waka. A waka is like a vessel or a canoe. And so we're thinking of this project as a way of creating a kind of new waka. We've also been working with Earthist, a group that I think maybe Soto's here, in Turkey and in like Central Asia on regenerative agriculture and community decision making around organic and regenerative approaches towards like land stewardship. And also like on top of that, what are larger convening spaces, hubs and spaces of resilience. Um, and some more maybe experimental, sort of like what might be considered like DAO native approaches that are taking sense information in and inputting it into allocation protocols, permissioning protocols within online groups. And each one of them is like kind of sampling or grabbing from this larger set of parts. But like each one of them has a sort of more traditional, I might say, sort of like almost pre-modern flavor and a contemporary flavor, and like to stoke that conversation is part of our intention. So we're going to basically leave it there, but we made this QR code for y'all to scan and we'll paste it into the chat. If you're interested in like getting a hard copy of the book, we would love that. As I mentioned, it's currently by donation only. And I saw a question in the chat. Like we have every intention to release it over time in collaboration with the publisher at a rate that like books would normally go on Amazon. This is like an enormous labor of love. So we're getting to that point. So right now it's based off of donation. And so if you go to regen.foundation, you can see our website and you can learn about the book. There's some really beautiful gifts that show even more information than what we've shared today. We thought this was a deeper dive than what the website shares, but we tried to make them, like complement one another. So you can find that on our link tree here in the QR code. Additionally, like we have a newsletter and we're going to be pasting updates around these collaborations. We have a number of them that are in active formation, that are in sovereign indigenous territory, which is a space that we're humbled to be invited into and makes a lot of sense in alignment with a lot of the values that we've introduced, both from a practical and sort of mythological level. And then we'll be doing a small run of like high quality IDK cards, like laminating them and collaborating with groups and supporting them if it feels like it's relevant, and maybe it's not. And that's part of the journey to learn this, to do IDK pilots or collaborations in different contexts. So if you want to play test it, get involved with a serious infinite game, which I think is a fun way of framing it, then you can. We'll show this slide again at the end, but I think with that, you all have been super patient and hearing us talk for 48 minutes and 50 seconds, so 2 minutes shy of what we thought we would be. And typically how the format in the Regen Builder Lab goes is that we break into breakout groups according to particular topics. And what we're going to do now is say, like, there's lots of conversations to be had and lots of interesting work that folks here are doing. And I hope I've like given a acknowledgement to those who are here, but there's a tremendous number of collaborators that are outlined on the website and in the book. So this is done with a big group of people. But with that said, we're going to do breakouts. And so if you have questions for myself, for Will, for Shyla, or Nana, you can go there and learn more. And if you've in a like, we'll do a little bit of a share back afterwards. I'm kind of skeptical that share backs usually help that much, but we'll do some kind of like circling up at the very end. Cool. Nana, can you help set up the breakout rooms? Okay, I'm gonna hop to mine. Thanks all.
Hi all.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Where's everybody located? I'm near San Francisco.
I'm based in Colombia, in the north of Colombia.
Just north of Seattle. Sorry, Luke.
This is
Where are you? Oh,
Finger Lakes region to New York.
Okay.
This is a very unstructured space where we can take some time to actually introduce ourselves because we are a pretty small group. And or if anybody has any questions about what was just shared or would like to share any reflections, this is an open space where this can happen. I could be a listener or I could answer any questions. This is unstructured because there was a lot spoken by us, so it's time for you all to speak.
Well, I'm happy to share an initial reflection. I worked on one of the projects that's profiled in the book, and it was just really cool to see sort of the patterns that have emerged over the years and that has now been made concrete in the book and the IDK deck. I wish I had that deck when I was going through the process of working with the community last year. But here we are now, and I'm excited to now go back and do another class and eventually work with it with other communities because I can just see how that's like a language that can make accessible this process of regenerative development. So yeah, just excited about seeing that emerge.
Yeah, that pilot was actually quite like a milestone pilot for us also to learn what like that sort of like really informed the development of the kit. So it was like very important that we were a part of it and we got to see what was happening and we could participate, and basically, yeah, as an end product now we have the IDK that would make our jobs a little bit easier.
That's here.
My name is Luca. I live in the north of Colombia. We have an organization here called Inhabit.
Mm-hmm.
We have developed a framework, a legal framework where nature, basically, we are able to acquire lands, and nature is a main actor. So we remove the patrimonial rights from the land tenure model. Nature has rights, and we provide rights to stewards.
Mm-hmm.
That have a commitment on developing what we call biocultural hubs, which are center of learning for new stewards. and they are biodiversity hotspots. So we have developed a model through technology, through an NFT, which encapsulate the legal frameworks to enable everyone around the world to buy the NFT, and legally in front of Colombian law, they become a stewards by proxy, because like it is a system of guarantee of the right of nature. So when you buy an NFT, you sign a contract which is encrypted, where you become a legal guarantor of those rights in the parcel, in the specific piece of land. But and here comes to my question, which I really like the work you all guys are doing. What we understand and what we think is that to create commons, new commons, let's say, because we need to find a way to support existing commons and bridge technology in a way that those commons become more resilient, right? Like we were saying, especially when we think about bringing funds to those areas, but also how can we create new commons that connects to nature and don't disconnect. So one of the aspect for me is more, I'm still thinking how this could happen, is that to create new protocols of a common, those rituals, to accelerate rituals which have been developed in thousands of years through trial and error. Those ritual has developed because there was an interdependence with nature, needs. You were living thanks to nature and with nature. Or this need is less evident today in modern life. So and to develop real protocols, we need to create an emotional relation with nature. But so I'm guessing how technology can help people to develop this relation, which is needed to actually understand which protocols to develop. So this is a bit what I'm now investigating. I'd like to know your opinion on that.
What is your project's name? Sorry, before I answer. It sounds really interesting.
It's called Inhabit. I can send here in the chat if you want the.
Yeah, if you could share the link, that would be amazing, because it sounds really awesome.
Yeah, we are building Celo. We're building Celo, and we are piloting the first project.
Yeah, so I guess like one of the things that we have run across the problem, I think this is the best case for blockchain, by the way, just to say, like how we can have like the more than human voice integrated through cool technology and run smart contracts on top of it, to basically do like commons governance is one of the nicest use case of blockchain that is very underexplored. But it's always nice to hear people that are exploring that intersection. It's always exciting. I think when it comes to community governance, I think one of the things that I have at least personally noticed is that we always start with asking what tools we want to use, or like, should we use Karma Gap, or should we use, I don't know, Hum Community, or should we use DAO, or should we use some other complex mechanism? So it always starts with that excitement to actually understand what tools needs to be deployed now. But I think the question that needs to be asked is like, what exactly do we want to do with these tools? Like, what are these tools for? Do we want to do permissioning system through which people can view the data of the land? Or do we want to have like a membership protocol through which people can exit and enter the community? Or do we want to have a way that we can collectively govern the resources that are present in the land? Like, what do we exactly want to do? And then it makes sense to think of like what tools fit. But I think often the problem is we do the other way around. And then we get stuck in a limbo where we're like, oh, but this tool is not doing what we want to do, and we need to build additional functionality, and we need to build on top of that. And the conversation just becomes about software development.
Yeah, I was thinking about the sort of the undueling. Like, we don't need to unduel, we do need to unduel, but we don't need to unduel because there was no separation in the first place. And look, I was thinking about something that was shared with me by Kogi Elder when I was in the economy.
It's a bit breaking, yeah.
Sorry, let me just see if I can switch.
Your microphone might not be the best.
Okay. If you talk slowly, we can tell what you say.
How about now?
Oh,
much better.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was commenting on the, it's like when you make it a software problem, then, it's like, oh, the software isn't doing the thing that we wanted the software to do, whether that was what was needed in the first place. And I was thinking about the comments earlier on about undueling. We there was no separation in the first place. We just have forgotten, and it's really a process of remembering that we live in a we live in a non-dual reality. And Luca, I was thinking about something that was shared with me by a Kogi elder when I was in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta about a traditional approach to agriculture where moving through the landscape, women would go one way, men would go another way, and there was a physical sort of weaving process that was also cosmological. And that is a social protocol. I'm just thinking about, like, where would we start to develop the digital sort of dimensions of governance if we started from that kind of deep sort of ancient technology of being actively engaged in relationship with the larger community of life in a place.
I think you gave like an amazing example of the Kogis, because the Kogis believes that by doing spiritual work, they are regenerating the planet. Regenerating the planet for them has nothing to do with planting trees, but has to do with doing spiritual work. And this is very interesting because they develop through El Pagamento, through different practices in specific places that have for them spiritual activation, sacred places. They create an emotional relation with nature, and they believe by doing that, they multiply the natural resources, which is very interesting. And I really believe that at the end of the day, no material action, like planting trees, can solve the problem if we don't collectively change the way we relate to nature, to land, how we value it, etc. So we need protocols that enable us to do that, and not to be, because there is many types of commons, but not all of them connect us to nature. So I will say that if our aim is to regenerate the planet, because there is other objectives and other battles, we really need to go on that direction, and they're really teaching us that. So the emotion produce materiality for them. The emotion produce matters. And biology, the biology of wonder, the new biology of cognitive biology, they also are proving that in a way. That's another topic. But what was very interesting, the graph, the biological process of the cell, which is really the way we make sense, we relate, and we produce biological structure for biology. The tree of life of Maturana and Valera. I don't know if you have run into those books of biology. They really teach us that. You're mute, Nena.
Sorry, I was asking at what stage of your project are you at, Luca?
We launch. We have the technology. We have three pilots, but we only start now to do the fundraise for the first lens. And so we open, like, people are starting to buy the membership, the NFT, and become a guardian. We always obviously have a problem of marketing and be able to spread the word. So we haven't have many people buying so far. This is the problem of markets, and we're trying to solve it. But otherwise, all the rest has been done, the legal framework, the technology, the foundation. There is a foundation, which is the vehicle of the legal frameworks, because you still need, nature cannot own itself so far as today. So you need a foundation that makes the kind of the vehicle of all that. So everything is settled and running. And at the same time, we, as in Habit, we build corridors, right? I'm an ecological restorer. I'm a farmer. We build physical corridors with different strategies. And this is and the token or the NFT it's another strategy. Yeah.
So you're also in the fundraising stage.
Totally. Yeah.
Most projects are stuck in that limbo at the moment. So I can really understand.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I want to give. Go on.
Love to know a bit more also what Luke is doing, Gabe.
Yeah.
Semakula.
I was going to say the same thing. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I can jump in unless somebody else is itching to go. I'm Gabe Travis. I've been working with Kulshan Carbon Trust, which is a nonprofit based up in Bellingham, Washington, United States. We've been working with the Regen Network for probably like 3 years now, kind of developing these biochar eco credits, and that's the reason that I've kind of gotten tapped into this community. And these calls often bring so much more depth and interest, from a personal perspective to just kind of this world that is emerging, especially kind of like the connection with the Web3 space and ecological institutions and the they're I don't know. I find that nexus really interesting. And Luca, it's cool that I was just checking out your website. It looks like a really cool project. So yeah, we've been working on biochar eco credits. We actually issued our first round of credits back in July this year. So that's exciting. It's kind of was a long process to get to this point. And I think now that we've done it, we realize there's kind of a couple of key hurdles. And so we're really looking at whether it makes sense to continue or, how continuing with, kind of eco credits around biochar, if that looks different in the coming years than kind of the model that we've developed so far. So happy to talk, more about that if folks are interested, but also I'll pause now and let other folks jump in with their projects and interests.
Makula and Brett, would you like to share something?
All right, thank you. So I'm from Kampala, Uganda, and I liked what you said, Nina, that we shouldn't be jumping right into the technology, the software development and stuff like that. Like I've been in that, my career has been through software and technology. And one of the insights I've learned along the way is that we've come to center the technology so much so that it is leading us instead of us leading it, So our approach, and we are working on an urban regeneration project here in Kampala, is instead to center the relation. Yeah, so the premise is that, again, the climate crisis is not about carbon emissions. It's about the broken relations between humans and nature, between communities and their ecosystems, the broken relations between our economic system and the living world. And so the regenerative imperative is not to capture more carbon, rather to heal or restore these broken relations one at a time. And so our approach is around starting from sensing which relations need enriching or are broken and need enriching in our community, and then collectively agreeing on how we are going to do that, and then issuing what we are calling Ubuntu resets to people or institutions that would be willing to fund what the community has already sensed needs to be healed in their community, rather than imposing reductionist metrics. Yeah, so again, we also working with Regen Network around the technology layer. So yeah, happy to be here and listening.
A big shout out to Abdul because their Ubuntu Resets is one of the next projects that we are going to be piloting the IDK sets with. I don't know if Austin already said that, but we are happy. We are excited to send you the cards very soon once we have them more in production done. And yeah, so they are one of the pilots that we are actively working with.
Thank you. Yes, of course.
Brett, would you like to share something before we close?
Sure, yeah. I'm Brett Ann is my first name. It's two parts. I'm near San Francisco. I'm out in the Oak Woodland Hills. This is one of the oaks that I'm regenerating in my backyard.
Oh.
And I think the way I got to this conversation, I was part of sacred space, like some of the sacred village sites here, protests for them to not get built up. And then that led me to get invited to a number of things, including this Rights of Nature project in 2019. And then that brought me to the Buckminster Fuller Institute. And I've connected with a lot of people that do different kinds of systems change from there. And then the most recent thing that I've been doing is the Bioregional Explorers Club, which is more on the somatic and philosophical side of things rather than the tech side. But this idea of, in the Bay Area, a lot of people don't even know like which direction the creek goes behind their house. So getting down to really basic, like if we go to the high points, what can you see and how is that connected to that? And physically getting out onto the landscape, figuring out what is it that you can eat, what are the different cultures around, and just physically exploring, and then also sort of porching, like being on porches or surfboards or kayaks or, you know, any of these places where we can be in this third space and really drop in with each other. And it's been a fun like philosophy group, you could say.
It's very interesting. I think that's how we learn how to be kin with the living world. I think that's like the basic thing that we all have to start with, especially in like very compressed urban environments where, because of that close proximity of just like concrete and buildings, we tend to forget that. So
yeah, and part of my draw to the Bioregional Explorers Club that some friends started is talking to one of the Indigenous women here, and she was saying we're trying to do regeneration or, you know, sustainability or get people to clean up beaches, but what kids actually need to do is just play and fall in love with the place, and then that can come later. And so we've been doing that, and then sort of organically out of that, people are realizing what the bioregion is needing, and, you know, urchin removal projects and other physical things. Thanks all.
And I say I agree with you. I mean, what we need mostly is to wander, to develop wonders again, and that creates the bonds, and from that bond creates the responsibility and the sense of belonging. You know, more than knowledge itself, which is very important. Instead of studying geography, let's study what the bioregion is, where the water comes from. You know, flows on my body also before going, and we
So
stop.
elegantly said. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking like how much water I've been drinking all my life, and how much of this water maybe have passed to my body.
Right. Hi, everyone.
Thank you, Vega.
Yeah.
Hello. I'm gonna paste the link for sort of the like just the ways to be in touch and remain in communication about all of this. And one of them I'm gonna do is just put in an email address. that if anyone wants to just directly contact us related to any and all of this work, please, you can use a direct line to us and would love to hear from you and talk. I'm also going to try to sprint over and share the Linktree link, which I think I can do really quickly. The link. And so if you'd like to look at consider getting the book, if you'd like to join the newsletter, if you'd like to be an IDK pilot or someone to collaborate with, or just like build your own version of this and think it through with us, um, uh, we're happy to talk. Currently, the minimum donation in this advanced release of the book is $100 because it's part of a donation. We've written a bunch around like the ethics and why we're doing that, but just to say it's not like we're a super small organization. The resources are incredibly helpful, but we're working towards having like regular affordable copies in the future. So joining the newsletter is a good way to be in the loop on that. And yeah, incredibly grateful for everyone's time. I'm sort of I always feel like sharebacks like barely scratched the surface of what actually went on there. I can just say from the group I was in, it was like you kind of touched like all 5 different corners of expertise in people in applied and like academic context. So I'm feeling incredibly nourished and thankful for the conversation. I think that's kind of what I've got. Anyone else from the Regen team I want to like chime in to like close this out?
Yeah, I'm very happy to see the number of people that came and stuck by till the end of this call. So thank you. And I wish you all have good holiday season and get to recuperate.
Yeah, we're all gonna like turn into puddles on the floor now after this call. Pardon me while I get semi-solid.
My share would be that like as meta maybe as sometimes this feels, it all does really need to become quite real. And I talked to Renata, who's just doing like real, beautiful, complex work in Argentina. So if we like keep to this, this balance between looking at these high level complexities and then like landing them in reality, like the book does a beautiful job and I think is such an invitation into that. So you go, Renata, and great job, Foundation team, on a beautiful book.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. We'll do more of these in the new year. They'll be on the newsletter. They'll be about other things, maybe trying to dive into more particular stuff. So we'd love to hear from you, get feedback. Let's go. What an exciting, gently terrifying, and totally exciting and vast world we have in front of us. Thanks, everyone.
And to quickly answer a question, we're going to be posting this on YouTube, so you can review it as many times as you want. Just know we'll be posting it there.
And we can also do a post on a post on LinkedIn and our socials, which will have also the links if you want to register for the IDK. All the relevant links will be.
I'll make sure that happens.
We'll be on the socials. We'll definitely be, well, after we become solid again, after being semi-solid for a second, we'll be on the socials. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. You're
Thank
amazing.
you.